region, in the 11 states that make up the Midwest region, according to Federal Railroad Administration. They wanted to accomplish a few things. They wanted to be able to prioritize corridors and investment projects. So they wanted to look at these different city connections and say, this connection between this city and that city, or these string of cities, is a more viable project, is a higher priority than some of the others, the smaller cities. So they wanted to set it for a kind of a prioritization. They wanted to talk about governance structure, and I'll get into that a little bit later, where we talk about how states need to kind of work together to develop these projects and create some kind of governance structure where someone's in charge and helping run the project and get it through its development process and get it into funding. And then finally, funding strategy. I'll have a little bit of information on that, on some new federal funding that's been made available for this kind of work. Some things the study is not. Mr. Schwartz was very careful in explaining that the study does not identify specific routes or alignments for corridors in the network. It's not saying a route from one city to the other should follow an existing freight rail route or a certain new route or anything like that. So it doesn't identify specific routes or alignments. It doesn't identify specific station locations, especially for new service. That could include cities that currently don't have service, so they're not defining which new cities should have service or which existing cities should have service at the same station locations. It also does not come to conclusions about a corridor capacity or operating feasibility. It's simply stating, when I show you the plan itself, these are good origins and destinations. These are very good potential combinations of cities for high ridership and development of passenger rail. It does not represent a funding commitment from the FRA toward implementation of any specific projects either. I think is the case when a lot of people see a plan and they see a map with lines on a plan and things listed, they automatically assume that this has been chosen as a priority project that should be developed and funding will be made available for it at some point. And that's not the case here. The Midwest Regional Rail Plan did develop service tiers, as I mentioned, prioritization. It talks about Core Express. It talks about regional corridors and other emerging corridors and smaller kind of network capacity corridors. What it's looking at is the most promising combination of cities in kind of a hierarchy of sorts. Core Express is listed there at the very top. When you already kind of see the map on the side. But when I show you the map, the only Core Express route in the Midwest is from Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, Wisconsin, to St. Paul. And that Core Express type of service would travel at higher speeds, as you see there. The goal, the 40-year vision for this is to travel at higher speeds, over 125 miles per hour, have more frequent service, have potentially dedicated track. Currently, the service that runs between Chicago and St. Paul and goes on to the West Coast is the Empire Builder, and it runs on a number of host railroads. And an interesting item there is electrification. They recommend electrification for those higher speeds and reliability as well. So they've developed other service tiers, and as I scroll through the map here, then you can see what some of those other tiers are. Some of the other tiers include Regional Core Express service, Chicago to Des Moines through Quad Cities, and then some other kind of Regional Core Express routes. And you can see it all hubs off of Chicago. The Midwest Regional Rail Plan is sort of like a spider or an octopus, or so to speak, that Chicago is the hub for all of these routes, except for a few smaller connections like Kansas City to St. Louis. You see St. Paul to Duluth and south to Iowa and a few other locations, Indianapolis, Louisville, Nashville, etc. So this is the Midwest Regional Rail Plan, and this is simply what it looks like. These are the connections that they've identified and prioritized. Funding for the Midwest Regional Rail Plan, it comes from this acronym right here that I'm kind of rolling my cursor over, is the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA. Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act allocated $66 billion toward passenger rail. Some of that is dedicated to the Northeast Corridor, the blue blocks over here, about $30 billion. So nearly half of that is dedicated to the Northeast Corridor that runs between, I guess, roughly Boston, Washington, and farther south. Other parts of it, multi-purpose funding. There's Railroad Crossing Elimination Program and the GRRC grant program. about $8 billion in those two programs. GRRC is where this program right here, the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvement Program, that's where the second train funding came from. That's the source of federal funds for the second train project, is GRRC. So there's funding there. There's also funding in the railroad crossing elimination program, part of that, and the dedicated national network funding, and then at least $28 billion. Part of that goes toward Amtrak's National Network Grant, and another part of it is a very, very important thing here, the federal-state partnership for intercity passenger rail, available for the national network, about $12 billion. So this is where the funding will come from to develop not only the Midwest Regional Rail Plan, but other rail plans throughout the country. So the next steps for us in the Midwest Regional Rail Plan implementation is to form these working partnerships among states, local governments, other stakeholders, and advocacy groups like us, excuse me, for project development and implementation. So these federal and state partnership programs, we need to develop a regional-led project prioritization process, and we've got a big head start on that already with Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois working together and developing the second train to Chicago, working also with Ramsey County. We helped fund the project. Peter Fletcher and La Crosse Area Planning Committee funded as well. So we've got other stakeholders, advocacy groups like the Great River Rail Commission, All Aboard Minnesota, All Aboard Wisconsin, helped advocate for this project. So I'm going to scroll back to this, when we talk about these federal-state partnerships and how these projects can be implemented, we've already got a big step in the right direction in the work that we've done with the second train, informing this kind of multi-state and stakeholder involved partnership. So we need to do that. We need to form these partnerships, prioritize our projects, and then initiate more corridor studies. Just simply get busy in developing more of these projects and getting them in the pipeline for funding. Again, the purpose of this whole Midwest Regional Rail Plan is to facilitate future planning of these additional service lines into new cities and expansion of existing service that is already running on routes like the Empire Builder, the Cardinal, the Wolverine, and other services in the Midwestern states, and to help support not only national rail planning, but also the state rail plan. Minnesota has a state rail plan, and other states have a state rail plan as well. So to support those state rail plans as part of the national network as well. And with that, I can hopefully answer some questions that you may have on this, if I can help clarify anything for you.
Yep. Kevin, and you may not know this. I got a quick question, and Peter may answer. Is the $66 billion, is that allocated dollars today, or is that a budget of, this is probably what we need to get a 40-year plan, or is this so-called deposited in the savings account of Federal Railroad Administration?
Mm-hmm. The $66 billion was in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was passed, so this funding is available.
For the next 40 years, or is it as of today?
It is available for the length of the act, and I'm not sure how long that is, but it doesn't correspond with the length of the vision that was put forth by Federal Railroad Administration is something that will take more time and more funding than what's available in the IIJA, than the $66 billion. It's not a plan designed to fit the $66 billion that's available. It's bigger than that. It's a 40-year vision for the entire Midwest region, and the IIJA funding, the $66 billion, is a part of that gets us a certain amount of improvement toward that vision.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to open up to the group. It looks like Trista's got her hand up, and Mr. Drodos, you're after that.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Kevin, for this presentation. I especially like the slide that says next step to build partnerships, because as you said, we're already ready and poised to be that partner. Is there a way that we can connect right away to be first in line, since we've got such an outstanding organization ready to go with a shared vision?
I think our next step is to encourage our state DOT partners to continue to develop this project and find out what's next in line. What do we want to do next? Do we want to continue? I know the Great River Rail Commission, excuse me, would like to expand on service that's currently being planned in this quarter. We've got a second train coming online in the next few years. How about a third? How about a fourth? And Derek will show us some information on that coming up in his presentation.
Yeah, my question is kind of simple, Kevin. How many people attended the meeting in Detroit? And I guess what was the arching mood of that organization or group?
Commissioner Trodos and Mr. Chair, the conference, the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission annual meeting, was attended by 30 people from all. I think there are 8 Midwestern states that are members of the commission. It was limited to 30. It would have been larger. The meetings we've had in Milwaukee and other locations in Washington were much bigger. It was limited to 30 because it was in person. It was still kind of at a time of COVID and things like that. So we had 30 people in attendance, and the mood was very optimistic. And the passage of funding for the second train, Minnesota's contribution to the second train, the $10 million that got that project moving, was kind of the highlight of the meeting. To be honest, it was the next big project that was accomplished in the Midwest. Other states talked about projects that they're working on, and they're doing rail improvements, they're doing siding improvements, kind of smallish things. But our project was the home run project that was described at the meeting.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. If I may, I'll just provide a little bit more information on the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission. It was formed by 10, 12 states in a compact number of years ago. Each state passed similar legislation vowing to work forward or move forward working on the regional concept. And the map that the FRA has out there has been in development for a long time with the Midwest Midwest Rail Initiative the states were working on in the late 90s. And the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission is comprised of 2 representatives from each legislative body in each state, and the governor appoints a private sector rep and a public sector rep, and he's appointed Commissioner Anderson Kelleher, and I go on her to these meetings that she can't attend. The Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission is well positioned to implement the elements of the Midwest plan. This, by the way, this is the 3rd plan that FRA has done for regions in the country. And the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission is positioned to move forward. And matter of fact, last year, their number 1 work priority last year was to support the $10 million for TCMC. This year, the priority is to come up with an action plan, develop an action plan to implement recommendations in the FRA plan. And right now there's a subgroup of folks of that commission that are working on developing an outline for the action plan to implement. And it'll talk about such things as governance. It'll be looking at putting together a approach to dealing with a cost-benefit analysis for the corridors, economic impact. It'll look at the identification of capital and operating needs for the entire system, and develop a regional prioritization process where you take all the state plans, you combine them together, and you depend on what each state has for a priority to move those projects forward. So we have a regional structure in place. The FRA has embraced that approach. We intend, like I had mentioned, to prepare an outline for an action plan, how we move it forward, be applying for a planning grant from the FRA probably in the spring or summer. The IIGA has funding for corridor development. It also has funding to support regional compacts like this group. So keep in mind, this group has always been more the policy group for the region, and the DOTs have been the technicians that have really rolled up the sleeves and looked at all the individual corridors. Now that effort's merged together, and will position Midwest really well in moving forward and getting our projects into the pipeline as the plan begins to develop nationally.
Dan, real quick, you talked about the DOTs kind of grinding out the work. How's the bandwidth of staff to do that work, or do you have to bring in consultants to do a majority of that?
Well, when it comes to doing the action plan for the Midwest region, we'll be bringing on consultants to do that. each state has a varying number of people that are implementing passenger rail. Michigan has a more aggressive program. They have probably 20 people on their staff dealing with passenger and freight rail issues, whereas we have 2 or 3 that are doing it. And based on the level of projects we have in the pipeline. Illinois has an extensive department on passenger rail. Wisconsin, somewhere in between Illinois and us, they probably have 8 to 10 people working on it. So the bandwidth varies, and it also is reflective of the projects in your state rail plan. North Dakota has 1 person working on passenger rail, and they only have 1 train that comes through the Empire Builder. So that's the bandwidth. It varies by state and state's commitment to advancing projects.
And to confirm, this commission that we have here in Minnesota and part of Wisconsin, Wisconsin doesn't have a commission like this, correct?
In terms of
representatives along a corridor.
they have advocates along the corridor. They don't have a specific commission such as this. And Peter can fill that in if I'm wrong, Peter Fletcher. But no, they have strong advocate groups like we do.
Meyer has her hand
They
up.
don't
Thank
have
you, Dan.
Yeah, I am wondering if any of the funds that have been allocated it would be possible for this commission to access any of them to advance our work.
Commissioner Meyer and Chair Vaughn, there are funds available for planning purposes. I would have to look into this with the FRA to find out if we are eligible to receive a grant for the work that we do, or if it's more for interstate compacts and other kind of more formal organizations that are more project oriented. But I can look into that.
That's a good question, though. Thank you, Commissioner.
And to
Thank you.
that question on the planning grants, the amount of those, if they're available, is a significant amount that requires a 20% match. So if the commission were to apply for it, there'd be tails to accessing those funds for the commission.
Thank you for that clarification.